An hour, and the time just flies by. And so I will say at the very beginning that you are all welcome. If you have any comments or questions while I'm speaking, to just raise your hand or something if you have a comment or a question. I will be speaking at 3:30 in the main auditorium, the main lecture. This is, as I said, sort of a fellow canceled and I'm filling in. And so I'll be speaking right now on the metaphysics of food. And the basic idea in the World Peace Diet, which is the metaphysics of food, is a chapter out of the World Peace Diet. So I'm just going to be kind of opening that up for discussion and for thinking about it. Because normally when we think about food, we're thinking about nutrition, right? We're thinking about something that's going to give us some kind of nutritive value. And what I realized in my research in the World Peace Diet, and I've been a vegan since 1980, so I've been actually studying this. Dean will attest to this, going way back, a long time ago, that there's much more to food and to our treatment of animals and each other and the earth by animal agriculture than we normally think of. Even as vegans, we don't really make these connections. So the World Peace Diet, the vision is essentially that all of us have been born into a society where from the time we were just little infants, we've been forced to participate in mealtime rituals that basically disconnect us from our natural wisdom and compassion. And that and really part of the research I did in writing the World Peace Diet is in anthropology. Anthropologists understand that meals are the most powerful rituals in any society, the most powerful way, the single most powerful way that any society passes its values and norms and mores from generation to generation. So looking deeply into our meals is really an adventure, not just looking into what we're eating, on some sort of shallow level, but really at a very deep level into the hidden assumptions about the nature of reality in our society. So I would say it's the greatest spiritual adventure a human being can go on in our society today, is to actually make an effort to look deeply into the meals of our culture. Because if we want to live an authentic life, right, if we want to fulfill our purpose here on planet Earth, we have to understand ourselves. We have to know, like the old saying from the ancient Greeks, Gnathi Sutan, know thyself. We have to understand ourselves. And most people don't realize, even people on the spiritual path for many years, I think, don't realize that in order for us to understand ourselves, we have to understand our culture, because in many very powerful ways, we are products of a society. And in order to understand our society, we have to understand our food, our culture's food system. The food system is the big thing, and yet the irony is kind of like, remember in the Wizard of Oz, that wonderful scene where Toto pulls the curtain back and suddenly you kind of figure everything out. There isn't this great Oz, just this little man back there. It's kind of like that. I think probably if you're in this room, you've already made an effort to look behind the curtain, right, of our culture's food system, which can be extremely disillusioning. Suddenly you thought, I remember, I think sometimes in one of my essays I talked about how in many ways going vegan is like a second birth. Like people talk about being a born again Christian or something, or born again something. And in a sense it's true, because until that time, basically, most of us grow up in a society where we don't think too deeply about food. And something will come along in our lives and we begin to awaken to what's happening behind the curtain of our food system, and we begin to realize that there's a lot of violence there, a lot of mistreatment of animals, imprisonment of animals, mutilation of animals, and it's a very polluting system and these other things. And so it's kind of it's a painful process in a sense. It's kind of like when you think about, for example, a little infant, or before we're born, so we're just still in the womb. It's very, perhaps anyway, very comfortable, right? I mean, everything is taken care of, right? I'm in the womb, and I don't have to, I don't have to punch a time card. I don't have to go to work, and I just get fed. Everything comes to me. It's comfortable, perfect temperature, And then at some point, though, things suddenly start really changing. Suddenly there's this pressure, right? And I start getting squeezed, and I start getting ejected. Like, what's going to happen? What's happening? Hell is all breaking loose here. And then we're forced through this birth canal, our head gets crushed, and get pushed out, and then we pop out, you know, and we're in this new world, and everybody's cheering. Hey, we got a baby boy or baby girl, whatever it is, you know. But for us, it's like, oh my God, this is terrible. You know, I just left this beautiful thing, you know. But now here I am, and it's cold, and they're slapping me on the butt and everything. And it's terrible, you know. It's painful, and it's in a way, it's a similar thing, I think, with going vegan, you know. Because before, when we were pre-vegan, it's great, right? I go, here's McDonald's, yum, 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 Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, everything's great. Oh, it's so good. I just love living in our society. It's, everything's good, the people are good, the food is good, we're all healthy, good people, eating good, healthy food, and it's just a good place, you know. And then, but something happens, and we start getting, we hear, maybe we see a video, we see Earthlings or some video, or we start to hear something that helps us like behind the curtain, and we start getting, in a sense, squeezed, and we start, and then in a sense, we connect with some kind of information that requires us to respond, right? We have to respond when we find out either the devastating effects of saturated fat cholesterol and acidifying animal protein, or the devastating effects of animal agriculture on the environment, or the devastating effects of the animals. And so we get, it's kind of like going through this birth canal, and we come out on the other side, you know, and now we're born as we're a vegan, right? Usually it's vegetarian and then vegan, but that really, in many ways, it's like being born in another world. And I think, and the thing is, when you become born as a vegan, usually everybody doesn't start cheering. Usually they're kind of like, what a jerk, you're a vegan. You know? They don't like it. And I think the angels are all clapping somewhere. I mean, some beings up there, yay, we got another one. But down here on Earth, it's usually the opposite. You know, there's usually this basic feeling of, oh my gosh, you know, you don't eat what we're eating, and you're just, you know, you're one of those people that says no all the time. You know, I won't eat this, I won't eat that, I don't want to eat that, and you know, I don't want to go to the zoo, I won't go to the rodeo, I won't go to the circus, I won't buy anything tested on, you know, I'm not going to wear wool, silk, leather, I'm not going to eat that, no dairy, no eggs, no, 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 no. But actually, all those no's are really a yes that comes out of what I have to say in many ways is a spiritual, perhaps a spiritual awakening, but definitely some kind of spiritual evolution or intuitive revelation where we begin to look more deeply and see the interconnectedness of all life. We begin to realize that we are all interconnected, and that if I'm harming others, I'm actually harming myself. I just can't do it. Some people go vegan sort of as a logical, analytical process, but I think most people, it's just like something they get it. It's like this aha, aha. And so in many ways, I think we're talking about a spiritual revelation that occurs to people, and we're born into another world. And in many ways, it is another world. And I think the beauty of it is that as vegans, we then begin to have the potential, anyway, of building another world, of actually creating another world. A world of peace and freedom and justice and sustainability, where those are actually possible. Because I think as pre-vegans, and as a society that's not vegan, it's literally never going to happen. I mean, I think it's obvious. People say, oh, we'll never have world peace. You know, that's ridiculous. Well, that's true. We'll never have, as long as we're going to be paying people to stab animals. And so in the research I did on the world peace side, basically, besides all the physical devastation that animal agriculture causes, and I won't go into all that, but you basically, how many of you have seen Cowspiracy, for example? Yeah, oh good. So you get a sense of the devastation to the oceans, ecosystems, and rainforest ecosystems, and just in general the climate, and we're sending about 200 or so, we don't know exactly, maybe 150 to 300 somewhere around there, animals and species into extinction every single day. So just this massive devastation of life on this planet by animal agriculture on the surface level. But what I was so interested in is, what does it do, how does it affect us on the deeper emotional and spiritual, intellectually, as well as culturally? It's the driving force behind war, feeding all this grain and so forth to animals while people are going hungry, and it's very traumatic to the animals and to people who have to do the work. So essentially what we're looking at is, when we look more deeply, is that we're seeing that as human beings, when we're raised in families where we're forced from the time we're little kids to disconnect from what we're doing, that is a profoundly devastating behavior for our spiritual growth. in the sense that we, spirituality essentially is about sensitizing ourselves to energy and becoming more aware of what we are, what others are, and developing a sense of kindness and respect and compassion for all life. I used to teach college courses in comparative religion. I love that. I love studying comparative. I love studying Buddhism, Taoism, and Jainism, and Hinduism, and Islam, and Christianity, and all these different traditions, and seeing how the wise men and women from all traditions have recognized that a couple of things, actually. One is that there is more to life than simply the material level. And we're in a society, we're probably one of the only societies in the history of planet Earth where it sort of tries to deny that. That says, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. It's called, philosophically, that's called materialism. It believes that there's nothing but matter. That anything that's not material actually doesn't exist. And so that's from the point of view of, many years of, thousands of years of people living, nobody believes that. But I've seen people, like when I talk about, for example, the World Peace Diet, some of my experiences and some of the things that I've just am aware of. For example, as a former Zen monk in Korea, this is an ancient tradition. For example, when whoever's going to be preparing the food for the monks, they don't just let anybody do it. The idea is that food is not just physical nutrients, right? That food is actually, a lot of it is the energy of the food. And so they would not allow novice monks to create the food. It had to be seasoned monks who would create the food. People who, when they're creating the food, are really putting their heart and mindfulness and loving kindness with everything they're doing, so that when you're eating that food, you're bringing in the energy of that. And in ancient India, I talk about this in World Peace Diet, for thousands of years, from generation to generation, the teaching has always been that the real nourishment in food doesn't come just from the matter in the food, that there's something called prana, which is energy, and you're actually eating the energy of the food. So these are ancient traditions that achieve, for example, in the Chinese tradition, the energy of the food. And so these ancient traditions of wisdom go back thousands of years, and yet I've talked to people, luckily it doesn't happen that often, but occasionally, who say, oh, that's just ridiculous. I mean, you think there's some kind of woo-woo thing, energy, and something else existing, and yet we see, actually, that modern physics is really pointing to the direction that matter itself is energy, and there isn't any matter. It is energy, and that's what it is. But the frontier of science at the moment is pretty well understood. I think that energy itself is a manifestation of consciousness. What is the connection between energy and consciousness? So that matter is actually a manifestation of consciousness. So when we begin to see what we're eating and what it actually is, that there are not only animal-based foods concentrating physical toxins. We understand that, right? When you're eating any kind of animal food, it for sure concentrates physical toxins enormously, because they're eating, what are they eating? They're eating grains, which typically, and grasses, and grains and legumes primarily. And there typically are laws in place with how many pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and so forth you can put on crops for human consumption. But for animal consumption, they really don't care. You just put whatever you want. It's just for animals. But then these animals, of course, eat all that, and they're eating many, many pounds of whatever it is for each pound of flesh. So the toxins concentrate in the fat, and then they're very often eating a lot of fish. Cows, for example, eat more fish in the United States than human beings do. It's called enriching the feed. So they catch a lot of fish, and they grind it up, and they feed it to the fish. They'll fatten up, the faster will give more milk. So we're eating milk, for example, cheese or something, or we're eating other foods that come from the cows, and this isn't just cows, it's pigs and chickens. They feed fish and all these animals, and then they also grind the animals up and feed them to each other, and they also feed the sewage of these animals to each other. So the toxins concentrate at every level. So when we're eating high on the food chain, right, as human beings, we're the highest in the food chain, and the animals we're eating are eating so many other animals. And so when we're eating fish, for example, I mean, there's heavy metals, PCBs, dioxins, hydrocarbons, nuclear radiation now is a big problem in the water. So all this stuff is concentrated in the fish, and then the cows are eating it and concentrated in the milk. So when you eat cheese, for example, which concentrates the fat, you can't get anything probably more physical toxins than that. You know, fish, chicken, cheese. I mean, these are really super concentrated with physical toxins. But I think something that's been ignored is the metaphysical toxins. In other words, we're not just eating the physical toxins concentrated in the animal flesh. We're eating the animal's terror. I mean, these animals are really living lives that are enormously, well, there's two kinds. There's chronic pain and chronic fear, and acute pain and acute fear. That's their lives. Those are the four options for these animals. You know, either chronic pain and you know, constantly being crammed into a cage where I can't move, or I'm banging my head against the bars, driven into insanity. Just or then they actually mutilate or actual hit me, beat me. So it's just the utmost, unfortunately, of misery for these animals. And so we have to think, how could we as human beings not only be doing this to these animals, but then we take the actual flesh of these animals, or the secretions of these animals, and eat them. I mean, eat them. Eat them. We eat this terror and fear and pain and despair and anxiety, and we feed it to our kids. I mean, can you imagine? That's what's actually happening out there. That's what's happening, and you have to have profoundly materialist society would ever imagine doing such a thing. To say, well, it's just meat, it's just cheese, it just, and the thing is, we're not taught to see the animals as beings, right? We're taught to see them as things. If someone's eating breakfast and they're having a sausage, say, or some sausage or something like that, it would be very strange, it would be unheard of, it would be almost unthinkable for that person to talk to their friends around the breakfast table to say, I wonder what she was like. That's not a she, that's just a sausage. It's a sausage, it's not a her, it's not a being. And so we live in this illusory world of making beings into things, into just things. And so when we do that on a massive scale, where we're not only eating that every day, this is the most powerful ritual a human being can engage in. And the one way we learn anything is through rituals. So this ritualized learning of reducing beings to things is injected into us from infancy, so that we never see a being. We don't see a pig or a chicken or a cow or as beings. We just see things, matter, and pretty soon that habit, which is injected from infancy to reduce all these beings to things, then it's just a tiny step, and it just happens. It's just natural. We reduce ourselves to things. We think of ourselves as a thing that was born and will die. That's it. And so and then of course as we turn these beings into commodities that have to be bought and sold, then we turn each other into commodities that have to be bought and sold. I mean, with the arising of animal agriculture, we had the arising of slavery. They went hand in hand. When you enslave animals, you will definitely enslave other human beings. In fact, whatever we do to human beings, to animals, we always have done to animals. Now we're microchipping all the animals, right? I mean, and whatever we animals have always done to human beings. You want to walk around being microchipped and tracked, but that's really this thing is when we turn beings into things. And so this is the most antithetical possible behavior and mentality to authentic spirituality you can imagine, which is looking at a being and seeing more than just a thing. Because when we turn these things into commodities, we turn ourselves into a commodity, as I was saying, and then pretty soon here I am, now I'm a commodity also, and we have a whole capitalist economic system where and capitalism and animal agriculture arose exactly together. You can't separate them. They arose about 6,000 or 8,000 years ago in the Eastern Mediterranean as a wealthy elite that emerged that owned livestock. Those who were wealthiest owned head of sheep, and goes head in capital is head in Latin. This whole idea of an economic system based on ownership of animals. as wealth is what we're in. So these animals are commodities, and we find ourselves born into a system where we have to turn ourselves into a commodity and sell ourselves on the market, and try to get a good price for ourselves. Try to be a good self. So we separate ourselves really from the being that we are, this being who's essentially born to celebrate our life in this magnificent, beautiful planet, and contribute our unique gifts to the world, and awaken to the truth that we are. And instead, we're born into a society where animals are reduced to things. We're in an economic system where we have to reduce ourselves to a thing, and we have to sell ourselves on a heartless market. And you think about what we do to these animals. I mean, every animal, there's no nurturing social structure for these animals. All these animals, pigs, cows, and chickens, they're naturally in the wild born into with a mother and relations, and their whole identity and lives, their whole way of celebrating their lives is through their social relations. And yet when they're born onto a factory farm or any kind of farm, whatever, backyard farm, that's just shattered. They're just a lone unit of production in a heartless economic system. They've given maybe a number, they're mutilated in various ways, they're just used as a piece of meat, taken, everything's stolen, their life is stolen, their time is stolen, their eggs, milk is stolen, their everything. Their purpose is stolen. We steal their purpose, that's the worst thing. So their purpose, instead of being to be an expression of divine love on this earth, celebrating their lives, even in grace and beauty, they're stuck in this squalor, and misery and pain and fear, because they're just seen as a thing. And so this whole way of treating animals and seeing them as mere things, we essentially do that. We're doing that. Basically 75 million animals a day in the United States are killed. So this is not just a side project. This is like huge. You can't imagine how huge this is. And so, but the point I'm making is that mentality that we force on these animals, we end up actually forcing onto our children and to ourselves. And this, I think, is the great wound all of us have faced. Even if we go vegan, we still essentially have been wounded at a deep level by this culture that objectifies, looks with the hard eyes, where instead of being raised in nurturing society, where essentially more and more, I think, as we see, even animals are units in a heartless economic system. I think more and more people feel like, I'm a unit in a heartless economic system too, and we have to somehow, look out for ourselves. But this is very, very, very bizarre. It's very wounding, and it creates all kinds of psychological problems for people. We're not supposed to be living like this. And one of the ironies, I think, in this whole system is that when people are healthy, when they're happy, when they're connected and relating and feel connected to the earth, they're not going to need a lot of medication, right? A lot of physical disease, a lot of mental disease, a lot of emotional problems, and so forth. Well, that wouldn't be good for industry. That wouldn't be good for the pharmaceutical. Where are they going to make all their money? They haven't made any money on me actually for 40 years, but since I haven't eaten. But I think the idea is that the irony, and really, is that when we inflict this kind of extreme pain on animals and misery and drive them literally into insanity. These poor animals are driven into insanity. They're just hyper-crowded, just crowding and living in their own feces and being mutilated in various ways so they can't actually operate. Then we basically create a situation which is going to bring a lot of profits to these industries, right? And they're going to be guaranteed profits from the various forms of physical diseases as well as psychological diseases. And so I think what we're seeing essentially is a situation where there is, I feel, a spiritual awakening happening in our society. We're beginning to see that we are not things. Animals are not things. The earth is not just a thing. We are living essentially on a beautiful planet. Have you noticed how beautiful the earth is? I mean, really, we were just at the Marin Headlands this morning, just looking back. I mean, it's just, and looking everywhere.
Muir Woods is better.
Pardon me?
The Muir Woods is better.
Yeah, Muir Woods, right? The majesty of trees, and it was so great to see these sea otters swimming around, and the birds, and diving and flying. This is life nature naturally is celebrating, you know, and we take some of these animals and we put them in zoos, you know, for our entertainment. And the irony, I think, is that we're in the zoo. We're in a prison we've created for ourselves in many ways, and we're trying our best to function. But I think what we're really seeing today is an awakening of what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as Sophia. You know, Sophia is the sacred feminine dimension of consciousness, which is in all of us, whether we're men or women. We have the sacred dimension of consciousness, which is the dimension that yearns to love and protect and nurture life, which is repressed by forcing kids to eat meat, dairy products, and eggs. So this is a real spiritual crisis in our society, and we've been in spiritual crisis for thousands of years, really. There were no good old days. I mean, don't think there was any good old days. It's when we start. I mean, I think there were maybe, if you go back before animal agriculture, there were good old days. In fact, I used to teach world mythology, and it's really fascinating to go into these really ancient myths. And all over the world, they really talk about a lost golden age, where people talk to animals, where people lived in harmony with each other, people lived in harmony with the earth, but then something happened, and you know, the fall. And essentially, what I feel on a deep level is that was when we started looking at animals as things to be used, commodities to be used, and we created a society of a wealthy elite and stratification and eating dairy products and eating meat. And then we created, of course, religions to justify that. You know, we had to offer, you know, Yahweh or Krishna, whatever it is. You know, the different gods want us to give them the flesh of animals or to drink their milk of animals and so forth. So we created these religions to justify our violence towards animals, because you got to do that. I wrote another chapter in the World Peace Diet on science and religion, and how both science and religion, you know, science and religion actually are portrayed in our society as being, you know, fighting. You have the scientists here and the religion, you know, these institutions, they just don't get along, you know. And I argue actually in the World Peace Diet that they get along great, actually. they're bickering brothers. I say they're bickering brothers. They kind of bicker a little bit. But they're both sons of the herding culture, the culture that injects all of us with this mentality of domination and exploitation of animals and nature and each other. And we have reductionist science, which basically has taken animal agriculture from being, you know, it was always pretty bad. I mean, they always, from the very beginning, were confining the animals, but not to the point now with technology. You have these poor animals just absolutely mobilized and undergoing horrific violence continually under modern science. And then religion, of course, justifies the whole thing too. So they work very well together. And who both science and religion actually don't like is Sophia. You know, Sophia is the one, is that dimension that really questions rigid religion and rigid science, which are really indoctrinating us, both of them in many ways, into materialism and into dualism, and to begin to see actually the living beauty of our lives, and to begin to live, well, I think really when you look deeply into spirituality, it's basically questioning everything. Questioning all of the official stories of our society about our role here, and you know, that we're superior and animals are inferior. I mean, I really question that in many ways. I can see why we would want to think that way, but whenever there's been one class of, or one type of being that wanted to dominate another, they always said that, right? We saw that back in South Carolina in the 1840s, you know, whites are superior and blacks are inferior. This whole thing, that allowed horrible violence, and men are superior and women. You know, if you look at the Thomas Aquinas, one of the founders of the Catholic, theologians, he argued very strongly that women did not have souls because they're not rational. And if you're not rational, you don't get a soul. You know, and they said the same. The white people said the same thing about slaves when they were, you know, doing that. And we say the same thing about animals now. I mean, this whole thing of when you have a violent, dominating force, they've got to we go fighting other countries. You know, we have to reduce them so we can harm them, right? Our so-called enemies. Oh, they're just cockroaches. We just wipe them out. So this reducing of other beings, this is again, so what veganism is, which is why I love veganism, is it's just an absolute radical rejection of all of that. It's saying, I'm going to learn, I'm going to, and the beauty of it is it's not being superior in any way. It's just saying, I'm going to come home to my true nature. And look with eyes that when I see a being, I see a being. And when I see a being, I naturally respect that being and see that I'm not in any way allowed to dominate or exploit or use them for my own benefit. We're here to awaken from that whole programming that we've been all injected with. That's just the great wound that we've all suffered. And so it's interesting, I think, to look. Maybe I'll just read a couple of passages from that chapter on the. So I've got a few more. Okay, and then I'll open it to questions. This chapter in the World Peace, that's just one out of 15 chapters, but it's called The Metaphysics of Food. And there's this, for example, this little story. This was written in 1901 by Charles Fillmore. Have anyone heard of Charles Fillmore? He was the founder, he and his wife Myrtle were the founder of what is called the Unity School of Practical Christianity, Unity Church. I speak a lot at Unity Church, there's a couple here in San Francisco. Anyway, and actually it's so interesting because Unity was founded as a vegan religion, really. Before the word vegan was ever even invented, right? It wasn't invented until the year 1944. But Charles Fillmore and Myrtle, back in the 1910s, they wouldn't wear leather, they wouldn't use dairy, because they didn't want to harm animals. Anyway, so in 1903 he wrote this. In San Francisco, a number of years ago, many people were made violently ill from eating meat bought at a certain shop. Physicians investigated, and they found that the carcass of a certain steer was the source, and it was presumed that it was diseased. Further inquiry developed this to be an error. The animal was unusually healthy and vigorous, in fact, so vigorous and forceful that he fought for his life for over an hour after the attempt to kill him began. He was in a frenzy of terror and anger, his eyes were bloodshot, and he frothed at the mouth while the butchers were trying to slay him. The physicians decided that the anger and terror of this steer poisoned his meat in a manner similar to that of the angry mother her milk, which is well known to make the infant sick. This instance was but an exaggeration of conditions that exist in milder form in all animal flesh offered for food in our markets. Before they are slain, these poor brutes are maltreated in ways almost beyond enumeration. Visit shipping pens, stock trains, stockyards, and packing houses if you want evidence of the sufferings of the poor beasts of the field. And these very sufferings are, through the law of sympathetic mental vibrations, transferred to the flesh of those who eat the bodies of these animals. The undefined fears, the terrors of the nightmare, and the many disturbances in stomach and bowels that man endures may be, in a measure, traced to these unsuspected sources. So, this is something that I think is very interesting. This is back in the days that looked to us kind of quaint, where we could actually trace meat to a certain animal. I mean, now they say, Eric Schlosser wrote in Fast Food Nation that there's typically between 500 and 1,000, the meat of between 500 and 1,000 different animals in one burger. The way the system is today, it's just like everything developed around it. But back then they could actually trace them, and then the animals actually had a chance to maybe fight back a little bit, unlike today. But the idea is that we can see, and this is not something I think that we should take lightly. The condition of these animals, the fear, besides just the adrenaline and so forth. And I honestly, I mean, I hate even to say this, but I was a monk in Korea, and when I was in Korea, it was very interesting because I've talked to people in this country, for example, and I say, would you ever consider maybe just giving up eating meat? And they say, oh no, I just love it. It just tastes so good. I'm like, I'm going to give it up. It's delicious. And then I say, so you couldn't give up eating the flesh of cows? And they say, no, I'm not open to that. And then I say, well, how about, could you give up eating the flesh of dogs? And they say, you're kidding, aren't you? I wouldn't eat it. I would never eat that. That's not food. I would never eat the flesh of a dog. Are you crazy? And I say, well, when I was in Korea, I had the same conversation with Korean people. I remember talking to this Korean guy, and he every single week would have dog soup, and he wouldn't give it up. But if I talked to him about eating cows, he was like, cows are beautiful animals. You can't eat those. You should never eat a cow. That's terrible. But I remember I went to the markets in Seoul, and saw the dogs in the cages. They're there. There's these beautiful little dogs, and they're crammed in these cages. And well, I guess the point I was going to make is that these guys will take the dog, they buy him live, and they actually hang them upside down, and they whip them, beat them, so that the animal is really in a frenzy of pain, terror, and then kill them so that there's more yin and yang, there's more yang energy in the meat if they do that. They actually want that because that makes them strong. That's really, they do that. I mean, it's an old custom. So they know basically what I'm talking about, the metaphysics of food. I mean, if you want to be really like a fighter or really tough, you want to eat the meat of animals that have been really abused, I'll give you that edge, that anger, that aggressiveness, And this is what we're doing to animals. We're putting that into all these animals. We wonder why we have an aggressive society, or why people are competitive, why it's hard for people to just be comfortable in their body, be comfortable in their own thoughts, be comfortable and just be relaxed. So, it's very important, I think, to look deeply into food and to see not just the physical toxins, but the metaphysical toxins, and to see that for thousands of years, human beings have realized that really the test of our spirituality is not so much in how we treat others who can retaliate. It does take a lot of spirituality to not steal from somebody if if you get caught, you're going to go to jail, or he's going to hit you, or whatever. I'm a very ethical person. I don't steal. But how do we treat? How do we treat those who cannot retaliate? Who just whatever you can steal from them, and they just nothing happens. You can kill them, you can do whatever. And that's really the test of spirituality, of spiritual evolution, of ethical evolution. And this is, I think, where we really can see that we have to grow, because animals themselves don't retaliate. Pigs and cows and chickens, they don't sue, they don't file a class action lawsuit against human beings, say we're going to take you all to court and throw you all in jail for what you're doing. Now, they have no power at all. They're just vulnerable in our hands. And we look back at what Jesus said, and I think all the great spiritual teachers, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. How do we treat those who are vulnerable in our hands? And we see that even though these animals don't retaliate, that our violence towards them retaliates in all kinds of ways that we don't recognize, as physical diseases of various kinds, as psychological or cultural diseases, as conflict with each other, within ourselves. And so it's really, I think, so it's so important for us, I think, to understand these things, to make an effort to understand these things, and then to move our lives toward what veganism is pointing at, which is living a life of radical inclusion. Say, I'm going to include all living beings within the sphere of my kindness and compassion. I'm not going to exclude anyone. I'm not going to exclude people of other races, or people of other cultures, or people of other ages, or sexual orientation, all that. But I'm also going to include non-human animals, and all non-human animals, and future generations, and just, in a sense, it's opening our heart to the vast symphony of life and saying, I'm going to live my life as best I can to support that, to not destroy it, but to actually honor it and support it and try to be a blessing in the world, find the way that I can bless others with the gifts that I have. And this, I think, is really the core of spirituality, and it's where we connect with our intuition. Because I think what eating animal foods essentially does is it forces us to repress our intuition. And intuition is really the spiritual knowing. I got a PhD at Berkeley, actually, on educating intuition. And I realized in my research that all cultures recognize that we humans have these two complementary modes of knowing, right? We use words like logic, analysis, rationality, and so forth for one type of knowing. The other type of knowing, we use words like intuition, revelation, inspiration, spiritual knowing. We live in a society in an educational system that overemphasizes the one, right? Rationality, logic, and pretty much neglects, or I would say actually suppresses intuition, inspiration, revelation, because that type of knowing would actually rise up and question everything. And it's based on, basically, rational knowing always has a wall between the knower and the known, the self and the world, the subject and the right? I'm going to try to figure this out. So I'm going to dissect this frog so I can understand the frog. Right? I'm going to take the frog apart, then I'll understand the frog. It's this separation of myself and the other. How do I ever know something by maintaining always a separation? We're always condemned to this frustrating separation in this type of knowing, where we actually never know anything. And what we realize, I think, in the spiritual realm of our own true nature, this is just our own essential nature and wisdom, is that how we really know something is when the wall between the knower and the known begins to dissolve, and there's a connection. And we make a connection. And through that connection, we begin to actually feel a sense of love. And that's how I think how we know something is through love. If I don't love someone, how am I ever going to understand them? If I don't love myself, how am I going to understand myself? If I don't love other people, how am I ever going to understand them? We don't understand without love. Love is understanding. And what veganism is essentially, it's love. It's the saying, I'm going to love I'm going to love others, and not exclude them and use them and manipulate them for my own purposes. And this kind of understanding where I keep separation, that hard, cold eye of research and someone who can just cut or harm. There's nothing more scary than that. You do not want to be looked at with that eye, right? You don't want someone to look at you with that kind of an eye. It's like, I'm out of here. These are psychopaths. So these are people who want to lock up that have that kind of an eye. And yet that kind of an eye is forced on all of us by the wounding of our culture when it comes to animals. A pig, we look at pigs that way. It's like, you're just bacon, look out. That's like, oh God, help. So when we do that, we just shut down our fundamental Sophia, our intuition, this deep knowing that will guide us in our life to live our life. And so when you have people, this is the bottom line, is when you have people that have been forced from the time of little infants to eat animal flesh and secretions of terrifying animals, you have people whose intuition has been reliably suppressed. You have people who will then become reliably obedient consumers, who will reliably believe the official stories that are given to them by the society, who will reliably remain their entire lives infants, caring more about football games. They know all the statistics of all that, and they don't know anything about what we're doing to the rainforest or what we're doing to animals. They don't know anything. We're just like infants because we want to drink milk our entire lives. And we want to believe the official stories because we've been disconnected from our natural wisdom. And so, and confidence, that's the other thing, really, confidence. We can't actually feel a sense of confidence if we have had that suppressed. I won't go into this, I'll just say very briefly. I had an experience quite a few years ago when the World Veg Festival first came out. I gave a lecture. I gave actually a 4-day retreat. And there was a woman at the retreat, and at one point I talked about some of these ideas in World Veg Festival. And she came to me later and she said, this retreat has been really powerful to me. I was actually raised in the satanic cult in New Orleans. And I had suppressed a lot of the memories that I had. And I was like, oh God, I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me, I don't want to hear about the satanic cult stuff. She said, I just want to tell you one thing. I said, oh, all right. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. And she said, the rituals, what these rituals did, they made me feel terrible about myself. I just felt so dirty and so bad. And I realized when I felt bad about myself, I would do whatever anybody wanted me to do. I would just follow orders. And I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And she said, the rituals, the main rituals in the satanic cult was we would take animals and we would kill them. And then they would make us eat their flesh. And then I thought, oh my God, that's so interesting. That's like amazing. I mean, Satanism, in a sense, it's something I want to think about, but it's basically, a system of just getting what I want. And spirituality is the opposite of that. It's basically every spiritual teacher, every authentic spiritual teacher said that the key to happiness is whatever you want for yourself, give that to others. To bless others, to be kind to others, be loving to others. And yet this other way of being is to just take from others and to shut down the natural compassion. And that the way that that's done is through forcing kids to eat the flesh of animals. That's the way you do that. And I realized, in a sense, our entire society is one big satanic cult. And we're in endless war, and most of the money is in the hands of a tiny elite, and we don't care about all these people that are hungry and having problems. It really, and it gets its power by forcing us to eat the flesh of animals. And I mean, it's my daddy's barbecue, and it's okay, that kind of thing. But still, at a deep level, we just shut down because of that. So, but veganism is essentially it's this beautiful movement, really, of basically reclaiming our life. We've all been, in a sense, hijacked. You know, our true nature is to have joy and freedom and to celebrate our lives, and we've been hijacked by eating animal foods into a prison of really of losing our self-confidence and self-respect. Because how can I respect myself if I don't respect others? If I'm not respecting animals and other people and hungry people, you know, people are starving because we're eating all this grain that could feed them, but we're feeding it to animals. This insidious inequality. And we just allow all these things to happen because spiritually we've been shut down. And what we do to animals essentially breaks all the taboos. You know, I remember when I was a Zen monk, and I still actually every day, I say the 5 precepts. You know, the 5 precepts in Buddhism are really the foundation of all world religions. Have the same basic 5 precepts. Number 1 is not to kill. Number 2 is not to steal. Number 3 is not to lie. Number 4 is not to commit sexual misconduct, sexual violence. Number 5 is to not force drugs onto others. Drugs are things that harm others, drug or alcohol, and not to force that onto others. So these are 5 universal taboos, really. And all cultures have some kind of way to stop people from doing that. But if you think of what we do to animals in factory farms or backyard farms, whatever, you know, in animal agriculture, it's those 5 things. You know, we kill them, we steal everything. Like I said, we steal their purposes, their lives, their milk, their everything. We deceive them. You know, think of someone fishing. You know, think of these. Tuttle granting creates these curved slaughterhouse chutes, so the animals don't know what's coming, and then you know they're killed. You know, so we're deceiving them. And the sexual abuse is just horrific. I mean, it's rampant. They're all sexually abused. They're all impregnated against their will. With sperm guns, where do they get the sperm from? The sperm, they have to masturbate all these animals and take their sperm and put it in. You know, it's just a massive sexual, violent, perverse system, which is something that's really covered up. And then we force all kinds of drugs on these poor animals. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry makes billions of dollars on over 10,000 different hormones and drugs that have been approved to be forced on these poor animals. Antibiotics and growth hormones and all kinds of stuff. So we are breaking the 5 precepts massively. And the idea is that you can never grow spiritually as long as the behavior is at a level that won't support that, right? It's impossible. This is one of the things I realized that, like in New Age circles in general, people say, well, if you just grow like through meditation and so forth, then your behavior will change. You'll become more kind and loving. That's, in a sense, it's true, but the problem is that if the behavior doesn't change, the consciousness will never go higher than the level of the behavior. So if someone's still eating animal foods, you know, you're going to hit a ceiling. So at a certain point, we have to realize that and change our behavior, our actions, so that we're not harming others or paying others to harm others and just disconnecting from our natural wisdom and compassion. And then our consciousness can grow. So that's one of the reasons I think it's really important, obviously, for us to understand these principles, that as we just live our lives as lives of kindness and compassion, then we have the opportunity, it doesn't mean we will, we have the opportunity to grow spiritually. And so those are some of the main ideas I wanted to mention. I've got a few minutes. Does anyone have any pressing questions? A few more ideas I would like to share. This is a huge subject. I'll be speaking in at 3:30, but I'll be sort of going a little bit different direction at 3:30. But, okay, yeah.
I gave it a couple minutes late. How did you say humans themselves become commodified?
How?
Yeah.
Well, basically, we're living in a society where we are all, I think if we look carefully, we'll see that we are commodities in various ways. I mean, number one, right now, we have human trafficking, right? And trafficking is a huge issue. You know, people don't realize it, but Jimmy Carter just wrote a new book. He's 90 years old. I love this guy. He's 90 years old. He just wrote his like 20th book. And it's on trafficking. And he was just saying, where he lives in Atlanta, something like 200 children are sold into slavery every month. You know, and this is happening all over the United States, happening all over the world. There's sexual trafficking and trafficking of workers and chocolate and a lot of other things. There's literal slavery going on. So that's an obvious example of commodifying humans, right? You're buying and selling humans, literally. But on a more subtle level, it's happening all the time. Go look for a job. You know, you gotta name your price. They'll name you. You're a commodity. You are a commodity on the market. You are. I mean, I shouldn't say that definitely, but most people find themselves in that situation. So, human beings have organized societies in ways where they weren't commodities, where we were basically egalitarian and we respected each other and we respected all of the abilities of each other. And so what I see, maybe I'll start wrapping up on this. What I see veganism is essentially is an extremely radical, in a positive sense, radical means going to the root, change from the way we look at ourselves in life. We can, for one thing, without animal agriculture, if we grew all of our own food ourselves, like plant-based food, we would need a fraction of the land. Like, we're using most of the land to grow food. We lived in an RV for all these years, traveling around, huge, massive fields of corn and soy just to feed animals. So we could allow the forest to come back, the rainforest to come back, the oceans to come back, the waters to purify, the climate to come back, wildlife to have habitat, the species to start celebrating their lives again. We could feed everyone on a fraction of the land. We're finding people doing vegan agriculture now, and just on like just a little suburban plot of maybe a half an acre and growing 10 or 20 or 30,000 pounds of food. We can grow huge amounts of food. We're doing it ourselves, where we live up. We have what's called a food forest. When we lived in the RV, we traveled. We saw people in Canada with these food forests where you have all these fruit trees, and then you have vegetables and herbs and berries, and it creates a whole environment. It creates huge amounts of food, and it just encourages birds and butterflies and animals to live in harmony. So we could organize our society completely differently in growing our own food, living in communities that are cooperative, celebrating our lives, letting animals live. There's nothing stopping us from this except that we are, we were born into a system where we're eating animal foods, and the violence of that and the way it concentrates wealth in the hands of a few creates this whole mentality. It's a physical thing, but also creates the mentality of the same thing. So veganism to me is this awakening of humanity, of human beings, not only not to have violence towards animals, but to begin to question all the official stories and to begin to live our lives in a different way. And I just want to encourage everyone to think about that, how we can live our lives in a different way. And I think, even if we find ourselves living in a city, we can still do our best to grow our own food as much as we can. We can all sprout and do something and grow some of our food, get reconnected with your food, support each other in vegan businesses or vegan enterprises of various kinds, and do the best, I think, all we can to live what veganism is, which is radical inclusion, a sense of kindness and compassion for all living beings, and then just trust your intuition and follow your intuition to know what to do with your life. That's really this inner guide system that we all have that's been repressed. But I think as we do that, we begin to create the possibility, we naturally encourage other people to do the same thing, and we begin to create another way of living. And that's really important, because if we don't do it within the next few years, we're hitting these tipping points. That we're not going to have another generation of humans on this planet, or maybe any humans at all. Yes?
You mentioned that, first of all, your book has absolutely changed my life, and it's one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life, and thank you so much for writing this book, and everyone in this room needs to read that book twice. Okay, and I have a question about the book, but actually one of the questions comes from your talk this morning about going into you say you give a lot of lectures at the Unity Church, and you mentioned that the founders, or the people who identify veganism, founded Unity. And what do the leaders of that church movement say when they're presented with the fact that their leadership, their founders, propose this way of practicing the religion, that the religion is not being currently practiced that way, and then you also mentioned Buddhism, and the Dalai Lama himself is not vegan. What do you say, how
right.
What do they say, not what do you say, what do they say in response to these conversations?
Basically they say, you can come here and you can give a Sunday morning talk at our church, just never mention the word animal or vegetarian.
What? But how do they rationalize that given their founder's message?
They say that was one of their quirks. That was a quirk. That was one of their quirks. They were vegans, they were vegetarians. That was just a quirk. That was their thing. They did. We don't have, that doesn't matter. That's what they say.
And the rationale?
So, pardon me?
And the rationale for that?
Well, they just say, you can't go along with everything they say. They kind of pick what they want to believe and reject what they don't want to. That's what we do. I travel to Unitarian, Unity, Buddhist, all these different progressive groups, and they all do the same thing. They all just say, well, you know, I like my meat, leave me alone. It's very easy, because 98% of the people are, you know, it's only 2% that are vegan, so they're in the majority.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, Ken.
Why do they say that? To follow up with the young lady said, you go into the church and
All right.
say what we can't.
What you have to understand is that a church, unfortunately, a church is a business.
Yeah,
A church is a business.
we can go deep with that, but I don't want to scare people.
They want to have customers, they want to have happy customers. If I came in and started, because I've done it, I've come in, I've sat there, I've given a strong vegan message, and usually at the time it happens, the people are kind of like, they're kind of shocked, they're kind of friendly still. But by the time Wednesday comes, they're like, they're pissed. This guy walked into our church, he started questioning my hamburgers. That's it. I'm not going to go back there. The ministers are terrified of that. They don't want to lose their congregation. So even if I do it in a really loving way. So what I do now is I say, buy my book. I give a talk that, you know, talk about compassion. I don't go into it too strongly. And I say, you should buy the book, you know. And then they buy the book and they go, oh, you know, Martha, look at this. But I mean, at least they get the whole story, you know, which is better than I can do in just a 20-minute sermon. They get, you know, 313 hours. So it's a, you know, it's a great question. It's just, that's the situation we're in. You know, it's basically people don't feel that they don't want, people are afraid to hear.
People have been misled, you would think?
They've been very misled.
I mean, it says
Totally.
throughout Genesis and throughout Leviticus, it says it right then and there.
Right.
Don't do that. But,
Right.
but then we're still
Right.
doing it, so it's kind of, there's some holes in religion that really needs to be
Right.
exercised so people can really understand
Right.
what it's all about.
Yeah.
No one's really
It's
telling
true.
the truth.
Right. So,
I
you
mean,
know,
what's the truth? I mean, the truth is really, what is the #1 problem here in America? Nobody wants to talk about racism and white supremacy.
right.
That's the problem.
Right. Yeah.
And we all are adults here, and we need to face that problem, or else bye-bye America.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Is it time?
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah, I'm actually over. So
Yeah.
we have a table. We have books. I'm happy to sign books and see. We have a special. You get a free CD, and I'm happy to sign them. And Madeline's art. But it really, gosh,
Yeah.
much love. I love you all. Thank you so much for coming.